Just a couple of days ago, we discussed that President Trump went onto social media to blast former President Joe Biden for having prevented Ukraine from being able to hit deep into Russian territory in response to Putin's offensive inside Ukraine. Well, today, as Ukraine celebrates its Independence Day, the Wall Street Journal reported that actually Trump's Pentagon has been blocking Ukraine from doing just that for the last few months. It's another piece of evidence to support the contention that Trump's America is actually an adversary of Ukraine, and indeed that European countries are quite right to fear that investing in US weapons for their defence would lead to similar situations for them in the future. So, let's discuss. You'll recall this was what Trump posted just 3 days ago, prompting all sorts of speculation as to what he might be allowing Ukraine to do. It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It is like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? Now, I doubt anyone would suggest that Trump's art of the deal is going to replace Sun Tzu's The Art of War anytime soon. Nevertheless, the sentiments expressed in that post, notwithstanding the foaming at the mouth rhetoric, is solid enough. Well, it now turns out that, unannounced to the public, the Pentagon has been blocking Ukraine's use of long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. So yes, as Trump argued, hence preventing them from using a powerful weapon to defend themselves. This comes down to a new high-level Defense Department approval procedure, whereby Defense Secretary and former Fox News host Pete Hegseth gets to have the final say on what Ukraine is allowed to do with the ATACMS weapons provided to it by the US. This policy was developed by the Pentagon Undersecretary for Policy, Elbridge Colby, who we've come across before. It applies to weapons provided directly under the Biden administration and also to those provided by European allies that will be buying them from the US. In a statement, Trump's press secretary Caroline Leavitt said, "President Trump has been very clear that the war in Ukraine needs to end. There has been no change in military posture in Russia-Ukraine at this time." And she added, "Secretary Hegseth is working in lockstep with President Trump." Remember, former President Biden maintained a similar policy throughout most of his presidency, but he made a decision in his final year to give Ukraine license to use those weapons inside Russia as they wished. You might imagine that then-candidate Trump would have welcomed that late move, being wise as he is to the nuances of military strategy and what it would take for Ukraine to win. Obviously, I doubt you imagine that at all. In actual fact, Trump said at the time that it was, quote, stupid of Biden to allow Ukraine to attack inside Russia. And he said this in his interview with Time magazine: "I disagree very vehemently with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia. Why are we doing that? We're just escalating this war and making it worse." And this is what we need to remind ourselves. Words just come out of the mouths of Trump and his team. They are purely fashioned to provide something vaguely plausible for the immediate question at hand. There is no attempt at consistency. There are no guiding principles that provide any sort of constraint on what tomorrow's choices may be. It's a style of post-truth propaganda that is directly inspired by the Kremlin itself, which is, after all, a master of this sort of gaslighting. As evidenced when the Russians once held a press conference to deny they shot down the MH17 airliner, giving 3 mutually incompatible explanations of what really happened, one immediately after the other. I talk about that and the open source investigation into the case in detail in this video here. We were not aware that the Trump administration had reversed Biden's former policy. I mean, we knew, of course, that they'd stopped sending new military aid to Ukraine, and at one point they paused intelligence sharing with them. And as Ukraine showed us with its daring strike against a number of Russian airfields deep in the country, having smuggled in attack drones over the course of months, Ukraine has always been able to find ways to make an impact regardless. But having pulled off such a surprise attack, of course it's a lot harder to pull the same trick again, since all of Moscow's defences are now looking for exactly that sort of activity. That Trump should be actively impeding Ukraine's attacks is no surprise, of course. You only have to recall how furious he reportedly was when Ukraine pulled off its strike against the Russian airfields. If Trump's plan for peace hinged upon, as it seems to, giving Putin everything Trump believed he wanted and then forcing Ukraine to swallow that as a fait accompli, then no doubt it was highly inconvenient for Ukraine to show that they were not out of the fight. When Trump posted his most recent broadside, people wondered if it signified the policy was due to change, because it's becoming hard, if not impossible, to ignore that Putin is not interested in, for example, a trilateral meeting, which is what Trump said he wanted to see. But Trump is always likely to feel that pushing Ukraine a little bit harder and giving Putin a little bit more is always going to be the path of least resistance. Sure, he was overconfident that Ukraine was on the verge of collapse, and also that Putin would willingly embrace an easy compromise that was strongly tilted in his favour. But the alternative, that somehow Putin should be forced into concessions, that Ukraine should be supported to make gains on the battlefield, it's hard to see that happening without actual leadership and dynamic action by the US, something which the country seems to no longer have capacity for. In the meantime, Ukraine has been celebrating its Independence Day. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney made a surprise visit to Kyiv to take part in the celebrations and to recommit Canada's support for Ukraine as part of the so-called Coalition of the Willing. While Carney was there, he took part in the ritual praising of the new global emperor, saying this: "I applaud the leadership of the transformative US President Donald Trump in creating the possibilities for peace." This, of course, is all part of Canada seeking to keep the conditions favourable to reach a trade conclusion with the United States and to serve what NATO members currently believe to be in their short-term interest, which is trying to keep Trump's America at least ambiguously still sort of part of the alliance. But despite these public pronouncements, galling as they must be to deliver, since I doubt anyone except maybe Trump himself would think for 2 seconds that they're sincere, despite those, Carney will be heading early in the week to Germany to cement defence and energy collaborations there, as Canada works to remove its dependency on the United States. Also Poland, to look at the aerospace, defence and energy sectors there. Now, it won't be news to NATO leaders that America has been vetoing the use of its long-range missiles by Ukraine in recent months. They will have heard that much from Zelensky, undoubtedly. But it will be just another reminder that they need to keep energy and focus on reducing their exposure to America, with its consistent leaning towards and promoting Russia's interests above any of those of its allies. It's worth noting, by the way, that President Trump did also send a message to Ukraine for its Independence Day celebrations. So, an excellent opportunity to come out more strongly in Ukraine support, you might suggest, given Putin's prevarications. Well, it was kind of supportive, while not being able to say anything that would suggest Trump was actually on their side. So he said this: "The people of Ukraine have an unbreakable spirit, and your country's courage inspires many. Does it inspire Trump, though? Unknown. But when that unbreakable spirit succeeds in breaking Russian airplanes, we do know that he gets quite cross." As you mark this important day, know the United States respects your fight, honours your sacrifices, and believes in your future as an independent nation. There is no part of that sentence that doesn't feel like it has an invisible but trailing it, as in, the United States respects your fight, but It honours your sacrifices. But you can respect and honour while not supporting, of course. Such words were chosen carefully, and they were, to all appearances, chosen with a view to how they would land in Moscow more than they were Kiev. And he finished with this: "Now is the moment to bring an end to the senseless killing. The United States supports a negotiated settlement that leads to a durable, lasting peace that ends the bloodshed and safeguards Ukraine's sovereignty and dignity." Sounds great, but all of it could be held to be compatible with Trump's previous plan of forcing Ukraine to give up as much territory as Putin wants, so long as it remains in some form as a sovereign nation. Now, Ukraine's President Zelensky thanked Trump for the message, because of course he did, and demonstrated that he too can use passive-aggressive politeness, returning like for like. So he said this: "Ukraine is stronger and has self-respect, and Ukraine does not wait for gestures of goodwill, but it has its own will to put into life what is necessary for us." So stuff that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and President Trump, by the way. We are not waiting for your permission to use your weapons. If that's not being given, we will find our own way to annoy you by hitting Russia where it hurts. And he went on in similar vein: "This is the Ukraine of today, and such a Ukraine will never again be forced in history to endure the shame that the Russians call a compromise. We need a just peace. Our future will be decided by us alone, and the world knows it." The world knows it, at least all those parts of the world that don't believe that Ukraine started the war, for instance. Now, will the reporting on this, and the contrast with Trump's social media post, put pressure on the administration to let Ukraine use the weapons that it has in the most effective way that it can? My expectation would be not, since on all matters of substance to date, rather than just the occasional rhetoric, the boasts, the threats, Trump has only ever aligned with Russia. So anyway, my good wishes to the people of Ukraine on their Independence Day. May the coming 12 months see a turnaround in their fight against their adversaries. First and foremost, of course, Putin's Russia. Secondarily, all those Putin allies working to strengthen him wherever they may be found.